Well, that is excellent news. That removes me from the unenviable position of being between you and lunch. Right, so I'd like, we've got a couple of, I'm Ian Bradbury.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I put up on the board there some different podcasts that I recommend. One of them is a podcast that many of you may have heard called Hidden Brain. A guy called Shankar Vedantam who does this podcast. And one of the characteristics that I enjoy a lot about this is it's a lot in the area of human psychology. And many of the people he has on as guests describing experiments where the outcome of the experiment is kind of counterintuitive. So I picked a couple from, this is like a 2019 podcast, I think originally, with a guy called Dan Gilbert from Harvard, who researches kind of choice and human happiness. So here's an experiment. So imagine yourself in this situation. You're all enrolled in a photography class. So you get to spend a whole semester in this photography class, take a bunch of photographs, and then at the end of the photography class, you're going to be presented with two of the photos that you took. You can only have one of those photos. You can be in group one. In group one, if you choose one of these photos, I'll keep the other photo. And if you change your mind at some point in the future and you want the other photo, we can switch it out. You give me the photo you chose back, and I'll give you this other photo. In group two, you have to choose a photo, same thing. But the photo you don't choose, that's gone. It's discarded, you're not going to be able to have that. So which group would you prefer to be in as far as the choice that you're going to make? The first group, yeah. So overwhelmingly, when you ask people which group would you prefer to be in, most people say, obviously, I'd like to have that choice. I'd like to retain that choice. I'd like to be in group one. So when you actually run this experiment and do this, and you randomize who goes into group one, who goes into group two, and then you actually follow the groups subsequently for weeks afterwards, and you say, kind of, how happy are you with your choice? Which group do you think is happier? Second group, the group that doesn't have the choice of being able to go back and get the photo. So it's opposite to the way that we think it would be. So what's going on? What happens here? Well, what happens is that once you've made the choice, subconsciously your brain gets going on, hey, this was a really good choice. You know, the reason this was a really good choice was it makes all this stuff. And because you are on that kind of irreversible route, as opposed to, did I make the right choice? I mean, I could go back and I could make the other choice, right? And so, intuition is that optionality, that freedom of choice there would be better for happiness. But in fact, it turns out to be the opposite, that having made kind of that irreversible commitment is what ends up making us happy. So, what does this have to do with Daniel and whatever? Can we make a connection that they didn't make in the podcast to something here? Well, what about improvement? And going about trying to improve things. So, if you look at how people go about improvement, what do they typically do? They're like, hey, this would be better. Why don't I change this? And they change it. And if you go and you ask them, is it better? They're like, yeah, it's definitely better, because there's all these reasons. rationalization of the changes that they made, because I made this change now in this situation and I've rationalized it, and I think I've improved things. You don't really know what you've improved things, right? You convince yourself that you've improved things. So the discipline of the plan, do, study, act cycle in requiring us to articulate the theory behind the improvement, make a prediction of what the result of the change will be, put in place a method for testing that prediction, knowing whether or not the change, or evaluating whether or not the change was an improvement. It's not kind of explicitly there, I think, in the logic of the PDSA cycle, but I think there's kind of a psychology dimension to here of trying to short-circuit that post hoc rationalization that's a natural part of that thinking process. So that was kind of, for me anyway, that was kind of a new connection that I made from that story. Another example that's in there that I thought was quite an interesting one was a speed dating scenario. So we had a speed dating was done this morning. So here's a speed dating scenario. You're familiar now with the concept of speed dating, right? Obviously. So you're going to go into this situation. And I want you to predict whether or not the experience is going to be an experience that you're happy with, right? Whether or not you're going to enjoy this speed dating experience. We give you two choices here as far as information to be able to make a prediction. The first choice is you can have pictures of the person that you're going to have this speed date with. You can have all sorts of, whatever information you want about what they like, what the hobbies are, what kinds of things they do, and so on. So I can give you all that information. Or you can ask somebody who's previously had, who you don't know, who's previously had a speed date with this person, whether or not they enjoyed it or not. Just a yes and no question. So, which would you choose? The first one, right? I mean, it makes sense that you choose the first one. So I want to be able to work out whether or not all of the things that I like are going to be simpatico with this other individual, whether or not all of this stuff will match. Which is the more reliable predictor of whether or not you're actually going to have an experience? The second one.
The first one, you make a story that you will never love.
You're prejudging on the first one.
So I think part of the issue here. So as far as kind of how you connect this to something else. Well, this is a analytic enumerative issue, right? You're trying to predict which experience is going to be or how positive the experience is going to be. And you have to have that experience. Well, in having that experience, there are all sorts of things that are not on your radar, that you're not thinking about. The person who has had that experience has participated in all of those things that you don't think to consider in whether or not the experience is going to be a positive experience. So another kind of, I thought, an interesting wrinkle on improving prediction. So some interesting podcasts.
Question?
Yeah. Sorry, if you have time for one. So I'm curious. I'm thinking about your scenarios you posed, and I think where my brain goes is thinking to whether it's as a kid or at a company or due to the government, we've all had decisions imposed upon us. And I'm curious if you've ever measured the difference in happiness to, let's say, in the first scenario, if you were to say, I'm going to choose of these two. So in your first scenario, you're just like, wow, that's slow. I'm going to choose of these two possibilities which one I want to keep and you get the other one, and I'm going to measure their happiness over time. The decision's been made for them. Or perhaps in a speed dating scenario, we have a third option where it's an arranged speed date. You get who we've chosen, we think that's a good fit for you. And have you looked at how badly or how well that affects the happiness down the road?
I haven't, I mean, I'm not in that field.
It's part of the podcast,
Being a rank manager and reporting on other people's stuff. I know there's another podcast that talks about that speed dating experiment and goes into it in much greater depth.
Okay.
And I couldn't find it ahead of time here because I know that they got into talking about the idea of arranged marriages and other people being better able to predict whether or not you would enjoy something.
You might predict yourself.
You might predict yourself.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing.